The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878. The wooden buildings seemed to lean against each other for support, their weathered facades telling stories of countless desert storms and scorching summers. A crowd had gathered in the town square, their voices creating a harsh symphony of laughter, jeers, and callous commentary that echoed off the surrounding structures. Standing at the edge of this gathering, Ayanna, though none here knew her name, trembled on the makeshift wooden platform. Her dress, once blue like a summer sky, was now faded and torn at the hem. Dust from the long journey clung to the fabric, and her auburn hair hung in tangles around her face. She kept her green eyes fixed downward, unable to bear the leering gazes of the men below who discussed her as if she were livestock. "Look at those hands!" called out a gruff voice from the crowd. "Soft as silk. She ain't seen a day of real work." "That'll change quick enough," another man replied, his laughter crude and sharp. The auctioneer, a portly man with sweat stains spreading across his vest despite the cooling air, wiped his brow with a soiled handkerchief. "Now, gentlemen, we've got ourselves a fine specimen here. Young, healthy, and she can read too. Found that out on the journey west." Ayanna's stomach churned. 3 months ago, she had been teaching children in a schoolhouse in Ohio. Then came the telegram about her father's death, the debts he'd hidden, and the creditors who sold everything, including her bond of service, to recoup their losses. The wagon train west had been her prison, and now this square would be where her future was decided by the highest bidder. Among the sea of faces, most turned toward the platform with varying degrees of interest or indifference. One figure stood apart, tall and still as the ancient saguaro cacti that dotted the desert landscape. He remained near the back of the crowd. His copper skin bore the weathered marks of a life lived under the relentless southwestern sun, and his long black hair was braided with strips of leather and small turquoise beads. His dark eyes, unlike those of the other men, held no hunger or calculation, only a deep, quiet sadness. Najin had come to town for supplies, as he did once each month. He preferred the late hours when fewer people crowded the streets, when he could conduct his business with the few merchants who would trade with an Apache and return to his solitary cabin in the foothills. But today, something had drawn him toward the commotion in the square. "What am I bid for this young lady?" the auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowd. "She's got 5 years left on her bond, plenty of time to get your money's worth." $50, shouted a man in a torn flannel shirt. 75, called another, a merchant Nazin recognized from the general store. The bidding continued, each number driving the price higher, while Ayanna seemed to shrink further into herself. Her breathing became shallow, and Nazin could see her hands shaking as she clasped them in front of her. In that moment, something stirred within him, a memory of his own sister, taken by soldiers when he was barely 16. He had been powerless then, too young and too outnumbered to intervene. She had disappeared into the same system that now held this young woman captive. $120. The voice belonged to Buck Morrison, a rancher known for his cruelty to both animals and the Mexican workers he employed. "She'll look real pretty cleaning my house." The crowd erupted in whistles and crude comments. Morrison stepped forward, his thick fingers already reaching into his pocket for the money. His small, pig-like eyes fixed on Ayanna with a look that made her wrap her arms around herself protectively. The auctioneer raised his gavel. $120, going once. It was then that Nazin raised his hand. The gesture was subtle, almost casual, but the auctioneer's trained eye caught it immediately. The man paused, his gavel frozen mid-air, uncertainty flickering across his face. The crowd began to murmur, heads turning to locate the source of the new bid. "Who bid?" Morrison demanded, his voice growing angry. "I didn't hear no bid." Nazin stepped forward through the crowd, his moccasined feet making no sound on the packed earth. The sea of people parted before him, some out of curiosity, others from an instinctive wariness. His presence changed the atmosphere of the square like a storm cloud crossing the sun. "I bid," he said simply, his voice carrying despite its quiet tone. The auctioneer's face went pale. I suppose, what's your bid, friend?" Nazin reached into the leather pouch at his side and withdrew a handful of gold coins, money he had saved for months, intended for winter supplies and medicine for his aging horse. $200. The crowd fell silent. It was an enormous sum, more than most of the men present made in half a year. Morrison's face turned red, his hand dropping from his pocket. "Now wait just a minute," Morrison sputtered. "You can't just—" "He's got the money," the auctioneer interrupted, his eyes fixed on the gold in Nazin's palm. Business was business, regardless of who was doing the buying. "That's $200. Anyone care to bid higher?" Morrison looked around the crowd for support, but found only uncomfortable silence. $200 was beyond the reach of everyone present. His jaw worked silently for a moment before he spat in the dirt and pushed through the crowd, muttering curses. "Go in once! Go in twice!" The auctioneer's gavel fell with a sharp crack. "Sold to the gentleman for $200. As the crowd began to disperse, many casting backward glances filled with curiosity and unease, Nazin approached the platform. For the first time since the auction began, Ayana lifted her eyes to meet those of her purchaser. What she saw there surprised her. Not the predatory gleam she had expected, but something she couldn't quite identify. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of shared pain. "My name is Nazin," he said quietly, as she stepped down from the platform on unsteady legs. "You are safe now." Ayana's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Safe?" He nodded toward the papers the auctioneer held. "I need those documents." The auctioneer, still clutching the gold coins, hesitated. "These here papers give you legal ownership for 5 years, as per her bond of service." "I understand." Nazin took the papers and, without looking at them, handed them to Ayana. "These belong to you." She stared at the documents in her hands, the legal papers that had defined her as property, unable to comprehend what was happening. "I don't understand." "You are free to go wherever you choose," Nazin said. "I ask nothing of you." The auctioneer's eyes widened. "Now hold on. You can't just give away $200 worth of—" Nazin's gaze shifted to the man, and something in his dark eyes made the auctioneer step back and fall silent. Around them, a few stragglers from the crowd had stopped to watch this unexpected turn of events. Ayana's legs gave out, and she sank onto the edge of the platform, the papers clutched against her chest. "Why?" She managed to ask through tears that had been held back for months. "Why would you do this?" Nazin was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he looked toward the mountains that surrounded the town. "Because someone should have done it for my sister." The weight of those words settled between them like evening shadows. Ayana wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to process not only her freedom, but the profound sadness she heard in his voice. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted. "No money, no family." "There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Chen on Oak Street," Nazin said. "She is kind to those who have no one else. I will speak with her." As they walked through the town's dusty streets, Ayana became aware of the stares they attracted. An Apache man and a white woman walking together was unusual enough to draw attention in Copper Creek, but word of what had transpired at the auction was already spreading. Some faces showed curiosity, others disapproval or suspicion. "People are watching us," Ayana murmured. "People watch what they do not understand," Nazin replied. "Their opinions do not change what is right." Mrs. Chen's boarding house was a modest 2-story building painted white with blue trim, standing out among the weathered structures around it. Mei Chen had arrived in Copper Creek 10 years earlier with her late husband, seeking gold like so many others. When he died of fever, she had turned their small cabin into a boarding house, offering clean rooms and hot meals to travelers and workers, who treated her with respect. Nazin knocked gently on the door, and when it opened, Mrs. Chen's weathered face broke into a smile. Najin, it has been too long since you visited. Hello, May. I have come to ask a favor. Mrs. Chen's eyes moved to Ayana, taking in her appearance with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen many people at their lowest moments. Come in, both of you. You look like you could use some tea. The boarding house kitchen was warm and filled with the aroma of ginger and jasmine. Mrs. Chen moved efficiently between the stove and a small table, preparing tea while Najin explained the situation in low, respectful tones. Ayana sat quietly, still clutching the papers that represented her freedom, trying to absorb the rapid change in her circumstances. Of course she can stay, Mrs. Chen said without hesitation, setting down 3 delicate porcelain cups. Room and board for 1 month, paid in advance. She waved away Najin's offer of payment. This one is on the house. We women must look after each other. Ayana finally found her voice. I don't know how to thank you, either of you. I've never experienced such kindness from strangers. We are not strangers, Mrs. Chen said firmly. We are neighbors. In this hard place, that means something. As they drank their tea, Ayana learned that Mrs. Chen had also faced hardship and prejudice in Copper Creek. The Chinese were often treated with the same suspicion and disdain as the Apache, making both women understand what it meant to rely on the kindness of those who saw beyond the surface of things. There is work available if you seek it, Mrs. Chen offered. The schoolmarm position has been empty for 3 months. The last teacher left when the town council couldn't pay her regularly. I was a teacher in Ohio, Ayana said, a spark of hope flickering in her voice. I would love to teach again. Najin set down his cup. The children need someone who cares about learning. Many of the families here work hard just to survive. They cannot always see the value in education. Then I'll help them see it, Ayana said, with more conviction than she had felt in months. Over the following days, word spread through Copper Creek about the Apache man who had paid $200 to free a bonded woman, asking nothing in return. Reactions varied widely. Some, particularly among the working families who struggled daily with their own hardships, expressed quiet admiration for the gesture. Others, especially those who profited from the systems of control and exploitation, viewed it with suspicion and resentment. Ayana spent her first week recovering her strength and helping Mrs. Chen around the boarding house. She proved to be a capable cook and seamstress, skills that had been honed by necessity during her difficult journey west. More importantly, she began to shed the fear and shame that had weighed her down since losing her father. Najin visited every few days, always bringing some small offering, wildflowers he had found during his rides, fresh rabbits for Mrs. Chen's stew, or books he had acquired from traveling merchants. These visits were quiet affairs, often spent in comfortable silence on the boarding house porch as the desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Why do you live alone?" Ayana asked one evening as they watched the stars appear in the darkening sky. Najin was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "My family was taken when I was young. Soldiers came to our village claiming we had stolen cattle. My parents and sister were among those who died in the fighting. I was hunting that day and returned to find nothing." Ayana's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry. For many years, I carried anger like a stone in my chest," he continued. "It made me hard, made me push away anyone who tried to come close. But anger is a poison that hurts the one who holds it most of all. What changed?" He looked at her then, his dark eyes reflecting the lamplight from the boarding house windows. "I realized that carrying hate was letting them win twice. First, by taking my family, then by taking my ability to love." The honesty of his words moved her deeply. "And your sister, what was her name?" "Ayana," he said softly. "It means eternal blossom in our language." She drew in a sharp breath. "That's my name too." "I know," he said simply. "When I heard the auctioneer use it, I knew I could not walk away. Meanwhile, not everyone in Copper Creek was pleased with these developments. Buck Morrison had been drinking heavily since the auction, his resentment growing with each passing day. He complained loudly to anyone who would listen about being cheated out of his rightful purchase by a savage with stolen gold. Mark my words," he said one evening in the saloon, his voice slurred but his anger clear. "No good will come of this. That Apache's got some scheme brewing, you can bet on it." His words found receptive ears among some of the town's less savory residents. Men who profited from others' desperation, who saw kindness as weakness and generosity as foolishness, began to whisper among themselves about the need to set things right. 3 weeks after the auction, Ayana had secured the position as Copper Creek's new schoolteacher. The town council, desperate to fill the role, had been willing to overlook her recent circumstances in favor of her obvious qualifications and the children's need for education. Her first day of teaching brought 12 students of various ages to the small schoolhouse, a modest building with rough wooden desks and a slate board that had seen better days. Among her students were children from different backgrounds: the Mexican families who worked the nearby ranches, the children of Chinese immigrants like Mrs. Chen, and the sons and daughters of the Anglo settlers who made up the town's majority. Ayana quickly realized that the previous teacher had struggled not only with irregular pay, but with the social tensions that these different groups brought to the classroom. "Education," she told them on that first morning, "is the one thing that belongs completely to you. No one can take away what you learn or use it against you. Knowledge makes you free." Her words resonated with children who had seen their parents struggle with prejudice and limited opportunities. Within days, even the most reluctant students were engaged in their lessons, and parents began to speak positively about the new teacher who treated all children with equal respect and high expectations. Nazin continued his regular visits to the boarding house, though now they often included discussions about the children's progress and the challenges facing the school. Ayana had discovered that he was remarkably well educated, speaking 3 languages fluently and possessing knowledge of literature and mathematics that rivaled her own. "My grandmother insisted that knowledge was sacred," he explained when she asked about his education. "She taught me that wisdom came from many sources, our own traditions, but also from the books of other peoples. A mind that only knows one way of thinking," she used to say, "is like a bird with one wing." These conversations deepened the growing connection between them. What had begun as gratitude on Ayana's part and protective instinct on Nazin's had evolved into something neither had expected: a friendship built on mutual respect, shared values, and an understanding of what it meant to overcome loss. But their growing closeness had not gone unnoticed. Buck Morrison's resentment had been festering, fed by alcohol and the encouragement of like-minded men who saw their relationship as a threat to the social order they preferred. One evening, as Ayana walked home from the schoolhouse where she had been preparing lessons for the next day, she found her path blocked by Morrison and 2 other men. "Well, if it isn't the Apache's pet," Morrison sneered, his breath reeking of whiskey. "Getting mighty comfortable in our town, aren't you?" Ayana's heart began to race, but she kept her voice steady. "Excuse me, I need to get home." "See, that's where you're wrong," Morrison said, stepping closer. "This ain't your home. You're just a bought woman who got above her station." The other men closed in, and Ayana realized the street was empty. Most people would be home with their families at this hour, and the schoolhouse was at the edge of town where few people passed after dark. "Please," she said, backing toward the schoolhouse door. "I don't want any trouble." "Too late for that," Morrison replied. "You and that savage need to learn your place." At that moment, a shadow detached itself from the darkness beside the schoolhouse. Nazin stepped into the lamplight, moving with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable with danger. "The lady asked you to move," he said quietly. Morrison's face twisted with rage and fear. This is your fault, getting people all stirred up with your bleeding heart nonsense." "Walk away." Nazin said. "All of you walk away now." "Or what?" Morrison challenged, though his voice had lost some of its bravado. "You'll scalp us?" Nazin's hand moved to rest casually on the knife at his belt, not a threat, but a reminder that he was not defenseless. "I will do what is necessary to protect an innocent person. Nothing more, nothing less." The two men flanking Morrison exchanged uncertain glances. They had signed on for intimidating a lone woman, not facing down an Apache warrior who showed no fear despite being outnumbered. "This ain't over!" Morrison spat, but he was already backing away. "The town won't stand for this much longer." After the men disappeared into the darkness, Ayanna found herself shaking, not just from fear, but from anger at the injustice of it all. "How long will this continue?" she asked, as Nazin walked her safely back to the boarding house. "How long before people accept that kindness isn't a crime?" "Change comes slowly," Nazin replied. "Like water carving a canyon, you cannot see the progress day by day, but over time, even the hardest stone yields. And what if I don't have time? What if Morrison and his friends decide to do more than just threaten?" Nazin stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Then I will be there. You can't protect me every moment of every day, and you shouldn't have to." "Perhaps not," he said. "But I will try." Standing there in the soft glow of the boarding house windows, with the vast desert night surrounding them, Ayanna realized that her feelings for this quiet, honorable man had grown beyond gratitude or even friendship. The recognition frightened her, not because of what he was, but because she had never expected to find someone who embodied such strength and gentleness. "Nazin," she said softly, "thank you for everything. For seeing me as more than what others tried to make me." "You were always more," he replied. "I simply recognized what was already there." A month later, the confrontation with Morrison and his allies came to a head. The three men, emboldened by alcohol and convinced they had the support of the town's decent citizens, decided to force the issue. They arrived at the schoolhouse one afternoon, just as Ayanna was dismissing her students, intent on making their message clear through violence if necessary, but they had miscalculated. The parents of Ayanna's students, Mexican, Chinese, and Anglo alike, had grown to appreciate the difference she was making in their children's lives. When young Miguel Santos ran to tell his father that the bad men are at the school, word spread quickly through the community. By the time Morrison and his companions reached the schoolhouse, they found themselves facing not just Ayanna and Nazin, but 24 parents and community members who had decided that enough was enough. "We don't want trouble," said Carlos Santos, Miguel's father, "but we won't stand by while good people are threatened." Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her small frame somehow commanding in its dignity. "This teacher has done more for our children in 1 month than the town has done in years. She stays." Sheriff Williams, who had been avoiding the brewing conflict, finally arrived and found himself facing a choice. He could enforce the will of the community or bow to the demands of men like Morrison. Looking at the faces around him, hard-working families who formed the backbone of Copper Creek, he made his decision. "Buck, you and your boys need to move along," he said firmly. "And if I hear about any more harassment, you'll be spending time in my jail." Defeated and publicly humiliated, Morrison and his allies slunk away. The crowd gradually dispersed, many stopping to speak words of support to Ayanna and nod respectfully to Nazin. As the sun set over Copper Creek that evening, Ayanna and Nazin sat on the boarding house porch, watching the desert come alive with the sounds of night. The crisis had passed, but more importantly, something fundamental had shifted in the town. The act of kindness that had begun with Nazin's raised hand at the auction had rippled outward, inspiring others to choose compassion over fear, inclusion over exclusion. "What happens now?" Ayanna asked. "Now we continue," Nazin said simply. "We teach, we learn, we help where we can. We show through our actions that a different way is possible." She asked, looking at him with a smile that held both question and hope. He met her gaze steadily. "If you'll have me, not as your protector, but as your partner, in whatever comes next." Ayana reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I can't think of anything I'd want more." 6 months later, Ayana and Najin were married in a simple ceremony in Mrs. Chen's boarding house garden, with the schoolchildren as witnesses and half the town in attendance. It was an unusual union by the standards of the time, but Copper Creek had learned that unusual didn't mean wrong. Their marriage became a symbol of the town's gradual transformation, a place where people of different backgrounds could build lives together based on respect and shared values rather than fear and prejudice. The schoolhouse flourished under Ayana's guidance, and Najin used his skills to help establish a trading post that served travelers of all backgrounds fairly and honestly. Years later, when visitors asked longtime residents about the turning point in Copper Creek's history, they would tell the story of the auction in the town square, how a lonely Apache raised his hand not to buy a woman, but to set her free, and how that single gesture of compassion had changed everything. The love story that grew from that moment proved that the most powerful force for change isn't grand gestures or sweeping declarations, but simple human kindness offered at exactly the right moment. In a world that often seemed determined to divide people by race, background and circumstance, Ayana and Najin showed that connection was possible when two people chose to see each other's humanity above all else. Their story became part of Copper Creek's oral history, passed down through generations as a reminder that one person's choice to do what is right, even when it costs them dearly, can create ripples that transform an entire community. And at the heart of it all was a truth as enduring as the desert itself. That love, in its purest form, is not about possession or control, but about recognizing the sacred worth of another human being and choosing to honor it, no matter the cost.